It's time for the whole 9 yards. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ralph Ventre, and I'm ready to give you the whole 9 yards on NEC football. As is always the case, we had fun in week 1, 2 key wins over the Patriot League, some impressive performances against FBS competition. It was a good way to kick off the 2019 slate, but now it's on to week 2. All 9 NEC teams are in action this week. We have a featured game of the week on ESPN3. We have a number of home openers littering the front row schedule. Let's get to it right now in the opening drive. 3 home openers against Division II members on the Week 2 docket. First, let's go out to Moon Township, where Robert Morris will look to win its home opener for the second year in a row under head coach Bernard Clark. They'll bring in Kentucky State. Kentucky State did not play in Week 1. This will be the season opener for the Thoroughbreds. Meanwhile, Robert Morris had a tough test, their first ever FBS game, taking on Buffalo in Week 1. Sophomore running back Elijah Jackson, 6.5 yards per carry in that one, 28-yard touchdown run in the first quarter. And now it's on to Kentucky State for Jackson and the Colonials. Catch this one live on NEC Front Row. We keep it out in western Pennsylvania, moving from Moon Township to downtown Pittsburgh on the bluff at Rooney Field. The Duquesne Dukes will be in action for the first time since their second-round FCS playoff loss at South Dakota State last December. Division II Walsh visits Rooney Field for the home opener. The last time an NEC team went to battle against Walsh, Central Connecticut posted a 56-7 victory back in 2017. Now, no opponent should be overlooked, but the real test for the Dukes comes with the impending 3-game road trip that follows this home opener. That trip will take them to Youngstown State, Dayton, and New Hampshire. But first, it's Walsh at Rooney Field, Saturday live on Front Row. To Staten Island we go. Coming off its near upset of FBS member UConn, Wagner opens up the home schedule against D2 East Stroudsburg of the PSAC. Wagner will look to control the tempo, win the battle at the line of scrimmage in this one. They had some success in that area against the bigger, faster UConn team in Week 1. In fact, running back Dimitri McKenzie had 115 rush yards and 2 TDs against the Huskies. Now he'll be in front of the home crowd on Hamline Field. And here's what his head coach, Jason Hoteling, is expecting to see on Saturday.
The message is really just about us getting better. You know, this game is the same as what UConn was. You know, it's a situation where we go out, 60 minutes, 2 teams, that whole deal. But, you know, it's really just trying to sharpen the sword, I guess you could say. Iron sharpens iron, game environment. And at the end of the day, the scoreboard will read what it's going to read. But, you know, it's about the process. It's about us getting better each and every chance we get. And then we get to tee it up on Saturday afternoon, which is great.
Moving down the schedule, taking a look at some of these prime opponents in Week 2. And it's St. Francis at JMU, riding high off of the season-opening road win over Lehigh. St. Francis hits the road again to face one of the juggernauts of the football championship subdivision. SFU sophomore starting quarterback Jason Brown looked great in his debut at Lehigh. He will certainly be put to the test against a JMU team that went toe-to-toe with Big 12 member West Virginia in week 1. They came up a little short, 20-13. West Virginia beat JMU. So now the Dukes are coming home. They're looking for some blood in front of their home crowd. The Red Flash come in riding high. This is a must-see matchup. St. Francis U at James Madison. Now, taking a look at Long Island University, the Sharks were 30-4 over their final 3 seasons at the Division II level. They've moved up to the D1 FCS level. They are a full Northeast Conference member, kicking off that FCS tenure against one of the best in the FCS, South Dakota State, top 3 in the national polls. The Jackrabbits were responsible for ending the Dukes season last year in the playoffs, as I mentioned earlier in the show. So LIU really diving right into this one, going against the top tier competition on day number 1, LIU at South Dakota State. It'll be a great atmosphere and a truly tough test for the FCS newcomer LIU Sharks. Sacred Heart also kicks off its home schedule in week 2. The Pioneers will look to become the 3rd different NEC team to defeat a Patriot League member this season. Visiting Campus Field on Saturday will be the Bucknell Bison. Both teams coming off losses to high-quality competition. Bucknell lost to FBS member Temple. Sacred Heart took its lumps at national number 7 Maine. Both are looking to rebound and get into the win column. For Sacred Heart, they'll look to kickstart that ground game. Yes, indeed, they did surpass the 100-yard rushing mark against a stout run defense in Maine, but the yards per carry were not where it needs to be. They'll look to get it going against the Bucknell team that they defeated on the road last year. In particular, tailback Jordan Meacham had a great day out in Lewisburg. He'll look to recapture that magic Saturday live on NEC Front Row and the NEC On The Run app. Continuing down the docket, one more matchup to hit on before we tackle the game of the week on ESPN3. For now, the Bryant Bulldogs are the topic, and Bryant will visit a CAA member for the 2nd straight week. Last week, they kicked off the Chris Merritt coaching era with a loss at Stony Brook. This week, they're headed to the Capital Region in New York State to take on the Albany Great Danes. The all-time series between these two programs is tied at 2 apiece. They met back in Bryant's early days as an NEC member. Albany was a Northeast Conference member up until 2012. But now, this is a non-conference game. Bulldogs against the Great Danes of the CAA. And as he prepares his team for the Week 2 matchup, first-year head coach Chris Merritt had this to say about Albany.
Where they're similar to Stony Brook is their size up front. They've got some good size on both sides of the line up front. They're more physical, I guess, in the box. You know, Stony Brook had a lot of athletes, so they played a smother you type of a defense. Offensively, both teams are somewhat similar, but I think that for us, offensively, we've got to find a way to get points on the board.
And now for the NEC football game of the week on ESPN3. This is a 9-game schedule. We kick it off right here in Week 2 at CCSU. The opponent for the Blue Devils will be the NEC's newest member, the Merrimack Warriors. They kicked off their NCAA mandated reclassification from Division II into the Division I ranks. The Warriors will face 4 NEC teams this year during this first year of transition into the FCS. Now, both teams are riding high following Week 1 wins. Both of them received solid performances from their quarterback in those victories. But let's give a shout out to the big guys up front. Each team has a rock at left tackle in this game. First, it's Eric Brown for Merrimack. He's a senior captain, has started more than 30 games on the left side of that line for the Warriors. And then on the other side, you want to focus on Central Connecticut's Connor McNone. McNone, a former NEC Offensive Rookie of the Year, has played in every game of his career, has started every game of his career for CCSU. That's 24 straight starts for the big man outside. He also can slide to tight end when need be. An extremely versatile player. Connor McNone, the left tackle for CCSU, and then Merrimack will counter with left tackle Eric Brown, 2 of the top big men in the Northeast Conference. You will see them live on ESPN3 and the ESPN app. Kickoff is 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Dave Popkin, Jeff Fiegels, and John Cabral on the call. Let's check in on the NEC stock market. I'll tell you whose value is on the way up. Well, it wasn't easy settling on just one player for this week's segment. In fact, a number of teams had multiple young players take a big leap forward in Week 1, but for the sake of time, we'll focus on one of those prime performers, and it's Central Connecticut sophomore cornerback Dexter Lawson. He played 10 games last season, mostly in a reserve role, but now he has assumed the starting cornerback spot opposite of all NEC DB Tajik Bagley, and he had a great kickoff to the 2019 campaign, 4 tackles in the win over Fordham, and a number of key plays. A pick 6 early on in the fourth quarter. Earlier in the game, he stopped a potential Fordham scoring drive with a forced fumble in the red zone. He was also credited with a sack, 2 tackles for a loss, and a pass breakup. Dexter Lawson getting the job done in the road win over Fordham. This Central Connecticut sophomore stock is on the way up. At this point in the show, I'm calling the Twitter timeout. Join me as we take a look at the tweet sheet. This week's feature tweet from Mr. Roast 98. That's former NFL veteran Terrence Knighton. He's an assistant coach for Wagner football in his second year on Grimes Hill, and he was rather proud of the effort that the Seahawks put forth in their trip to UConn on Thursday night. Knighton, a Connecticut native, certainly had plenty of reason to be proud of those Seahawks. They hung with an FBS member, the 3-point margin of defeat, the smallest ever by an NEC team going up against a member of the Football Bowl subdivision. In fact, Wagner also owned the prior mark. They lost a 7-3 affair to FAU back in 2012. One other impressive note about Wagner's performance was running back Dimitri McKenzie, over 100 yards on the ground, 2 big touchdown runs, 13 carries, 115 yards to be exact. That's the second highest single game rushing performance by an NEC player in an FBS game. So as you can see, plenty of reason for Pot Roast and the Seahawks to have a positive outlook following a tight loss to UConn. That's amazing, bro. Well, what has me in a state of amazement this week? Well, I've been looking over the box score from the St. Francis victory at Lehigh, and it's that red flash run defense. SFU limited the Mountain Hawks to only 11 rush yards on 19 carries. That's 0.6 yard per attempt. The defense limited the Lehigh offense to under 300 yards overall, and they did not allow an offensive touchdown. Lehigh's lone trip to pay dirt came on a blocked punt, so the SFU defense holding strong on the road against Lehigh, only 11 rush yards in 19 carries. Stats amazing. Now moving on to the Did You Know portion of the program, time for me to drop some more knowledge on NEC football, in particular the NEC in the NFL. Did you know that Central Connecticut State alumnus Jacob Dogala became the first former NEC quarterback to make it onto an NFL 53-man roster? Dogala, who graduated as CCSU's all-time leading passer this past May, went undrafted but signed in the hours following the draft with the Cincinnati Bengals. They had seemed to be high on him all along. He made a pre-draft visit to Cincinnati. He excelled in rookie minicamp, drew some rave reviews during training camp, performed incredibly well in his 2 preseason appearances, and now Cincinnati has placed him on to its 53-man roster. Congrats to Jacob Dogala. 2 former Wagner Seahawks also joined Dogala on the right side of NFL Cutdown Day. Baltimore Ravens tackle Greg Senat, he was a 6th-round pick of the Ravens 2 years ago, missed his whole rookie year on IR. He made the Ravens 53-man. And then, of course, veteran Julian Stanford. He is entering his 7th NFL season, his 2nd with the Buffalo Bills, 2nd-string middle linebacker and special teams ace. Jake Dogala, Julian Stanford, Greg Senat, all on NFL rosters, and Bryant alum Tom Kennedy on the Lions practice squad. So yes, you will see the NEC play on Sundays. We are nearing the end of the program, but first, we have to chop it up as we do every week with Rick Saratella of the NFL Draft Bible. Rick and I did some work in the chop shop earlier this week. Week 1 of the FCS season in the books. Week 2 coming up. All 9 NEC teams will be in action in week 2. We'll do a little rewind. We'll look ahead, and we'll chop it up with Rick Saratella of the NFL Draft Bible. So, Rick, welcome back. Your initial impressions of week 1 from around the NEC. Was there a performance or two in particular that really impressed you? What was your top performance from week 1 in the Northeast Conference?
Yeah, I'll give you one on each side of the ball, Ralph, and we're chopping it up week 2 all season long here, and you can't see it behind the banner, but I got the blade sharpener out because, some guys were looking sharp, and I would say, that man that we talked about opening week, Chris Williams, kind of under the radar a little bit, 300-pound defensive lineman there. Of course, we mentioned working with Pot Roast as positional coach, but hey, this is a hard guy to block. 11 tackles on the day, all over the field. Didn't make it out to that Wagner UConn game, but hey, UConn was heavily favored. Wagner nearly pulled off the upset. I think they lost by 3, and a big reason was because of Chris Williams, those 11 tackles. Cam Gill also with a 1.5 tackle for loss in the backfield. So Wagner, listen, anytime an FCS team is competing with an FBS team, it doesn't matter the caliber of an FBS team. They're playing with more scholarships. So that tells me Wagner is a team to watch. And then on the offensive side of the ball, we're going to talk about St. Francis more in a second, but this quarterback just burst onto my radar. Sophomore signal caller Jason Brown. Looks like he had a 300-yard passing day against Lehigh, the game you were in attendance for. So I'm going to be looking forward to seeing him in person this week in week 2. And an honorable mention, because offensive linemen need a little bit of love too, Javon Brown, that CCSU, one of the NEC teams on the board with the victory in week 1. They averaged 7 yards per rush, and that's thanks in part to Javon Brown anchoring that offensive line unit.
So we'll go right into week 2 then. St. Francis, JMU, you'll be down in Harrisonburg to witness that one live. So I assume that's your game to watch. And who within the game are you taking a look at? Obviously, Jason Brown. I'm sure there's some guys on the JMU side. But what are you expecting in that SFU-JMU matchup?
In terms of players here, we mentioned the quarterback, but hey, I want to see some of those guys blocking up front for him, especially Christian Eubanks, who's on the NFL radar. He's going to have a huge test here. Obviously, James Madison coming off of a near upset over West Virginia, almost knocking them off last week. So they're going to be a little bit ticked off, looking to rebound. And Eubanks is going to have his hand filled because, as you mentioned, James Madison also with a few players on the radar, an FBS transfer and Rondell Carter coming over from Rutgers on the defensive line there for James Madison. They have a linebacker there, Daka, I think, is another big school transfer. So Eubanks is going to be tested here. And I'll tell you what, regardless of the outcome, how he performs in this game could go a long way in terms of how NFL teams view his draft stock at the end of the year.
As always, it's a pleasure chopping it up with you. Enjoy the game down in Harrisonburg, and we'll check in with you again next week in the Chop Shop on the whole 9 yards. So there you have it, everything you need to know heading into week 2 of the 2019 FCS football season. All 9 NEC teams are in action. Merrimack, CCSU in the featured game of the week on ESPN3. We have a number of free live events at necfrontrow.com. And now you can also access those games via NEC On The Run app on Android, Roku, Apple TV, and the like. Thank you for joining me for this edition of the Whole 9 Yards. I will see you again next week. I'm Ralph Ventre. Until next time.